6:34 a.m., July 18th, 1944, Dvina River, Latvia, Eastern Front. Captain Werner Schreiber stared through the sights of his Tiger wine tank at the bridge, 800 meters away. What he saw made his blood run cold. Soviet tanks, T-34s, one after another, and rolled across the 200-meter stone bridge. He counted quickly. 10, 20, 30. He stopped counting at 50. An entire tank division was using the only strategic bridge in that sector to bypass the German lines. Schreiber knew if these tanks got through, they would encircle 3 German divisions, 12,000 men, his comrades, his friends. But he only had one tank, a 5-man crew, and an idea so insane that even his radio operator thought he'd lost his mind. In the summer of 1944, the German army on the Eastern Front was on the verge of collapse. Operation Bagration, the massive Soviet offensive, had torn a 250-kilometer-wide hole in the German lines in just 4 weeks. Over 300,000 German soldiers were dead, wounded, or captured. The Red Army was rolling westward at a speed that surprised even Stalin himself. Every day, cities that had been considered impregnable just months before fell. The German troops fought desperately, but against the Soviet mass, it seemed hopeless. Captain Werner Schreiber, 29 years old, commanded a heavy tank detachment with 3 Tiger I tanks, but that morning, his other 2 tanks were out of commission, one with transmission failure, the other out of ammunition. Only Schreiber's Tiger 237 was operational, 56 tons of steel, armored with 100mm frontal plates, armed with the feared 88mm KWK-36 cannon, a masterpiece of German engineering. But against 50 T-34s, the math was merciless. The Dvina Bridge was strategically crucial. It was the only river crossing within a 60-kilometer radius. Capable of supporting heavy tanks, the Dvina River itself was a natural obstacle, 40 meters deep at this point, with strong currents that made any pontoon bridge impossible. The Soviets knew it. The Germans knew it. This bridge wasn't just infrastructure, it was the key to the entire sector. Built in 1912, under Tsarist rule, the bridge was a masterpiece of its time, 200 meters long, 5 massive stone pillars designed for heavy railroad trains. The engineering was solid, typical Russian over-engineering. The bridge had survived 2 world wars, revolution, civil war, and countless harsh winters. But it was never designed for the weight of modern battle tanks. German army engineers had already prepared the bridge for demolition weeks ago. Captain Emil Richter, an explosives expert with 12 years of experience, had personally placed the charges, 60 zinc-lined crates, each filled with 50 kilograms of Donarit explosive. Donarit was a German army standard mixture, 80% ammonium nitrate, 12% TNT, 8% nitroglycerin, less powerful than pure TNT, but more stable and cheaper to produce. For bridge demolitions, it was perfect. The crates were strategically placed under each bridge pillar where the structural stress was highest, along the main girders where tension was concentrated. At the connection points between pillars and superstructure, Richter had calculated the math personally. With simultaneous detonation of all 60 crates, the combined force would be 3,000 kilograms of TNT equivalent, enough to shatter every pillar, tear every girder, collapse the entire structure in seconds. But there was a problem, a massive, bureaucratic, deadly problem, after the fiasco at the Rhine, where premature demolitions had destroyed valuable retreat routes. Hitler had personally ordered, no bridge may be blown without written authorization from the divisional commander. And the divisional commander, Major General Helmut Fröhlich, was 40 kilometers away at headquarters, unreachable by radio. because Soviet artillery had destroyed all the telephone lines. Schreiber faced an impossible choice: wait for orders, while 50 Soviet tanks poured through and encircled 12,000 German soldiers, or take the initiative, act against direct orders from the Führer and potentially face a court-martial. For most officers, the choice would have been clear: follow orders, survive. But Werner Schreiber was no ordinary officer. Born in Munich, Schreiber had studied civil engineering. Before the war broke out, he understood structures, loads, stresses. When he looked at the bridge, he didn't just see stone and steel. He saw stress lines, weak points, mathematical precision. And in that moment, he saw a possibility, a mad, precise, deadly possibility. The bridge was 200 meters long, built in 1912, designed for railway loads of a maximum of 80 tons. A T-34 weighed 26 tons. 50 T-34s meant 300 tons of moving load. The bridge would hold, but it would be at its load limit if the demolition charges detonated at the exact right moment, not when the tanks were on it, but when most were concentrated in the middle of the bridge. The combination of structural failure and the weight of the tanks would be catastrophic. The bridge wouldn't just collapse. It would collapse like an avalanche, dragging the tanks with it into the 40-meter deep Dvina River. But the timing had to be perfect, 3 seconds too early, and only 10 tanks would be on the bridge. 40 would escape, 3 seconds too late, and most of the tanks would already be across. The window for success was 7 seconds long. 7 seconds to make a decision that would change the war in that sector. Schreiber called his crew together. Staff Sergeant Karl Braun, gunner, 34 years old, a veteran since Poland. Sergeant Hans Fischer, loader, 22, fresh out of training. Private Otto Weber, radio operator, 27, a former math teacher. Private Fritz Müller, driver, 31, the calmest man under fire Schreiber had ever seen. These 4 men were his world. Their opinions mattered. Schreiber explained the plan. The faces of his men spoke volumes. Fischer, the youngest, turned pale. Weber shook his head in disbelief. Braun, the most experienced, stared at Schreiber for a long time. "Sir," he said finally, "if this goes wrong, they'll have us shot, summarily." "Before a Soviet tribunal, yes," Schreiber replied. "But if we do nothing, 12,000 of our comrades will die." Braun nodded slowly. "Then let's throw these pigs into the river." The plan required surgical precision. Captain Schreiber had to get the Tiger white tank into position, 600 meters from the bridge, with a direct line of sight to the Western Bridge Pier, where the main explosive charge was located. The German Army engineers had installed a fail-safe system. The ignition was electrical, but there was also a mechanical backup option. A direct hit on the charge box, with an 88mm round, would trigger the detonation. It was never designed for this purpose, but theoretically it should work. But Captain Schreiber had an additional problem. The Soviet T-34s weren't coming alone. Infantry accompanied them. Anti-tank guns were being transported on trucks. If Tiger 237 was spotted before the shot was fired, they'd be destroyed under concentrated fire. Captain Schreiber needed to remain undetected until the last possible moment. Lucas, the driver, maneuvered the Tiger white tank through the dense forest, using every bit of cover. Moving 56 tons quietly was impossible, but Lucas was an artist. He knew every quirk of his Maybach engine, every resistance of the tracks. The Tiger I tank crawled forward like a steel ghost. Slowly, methodically, after 20 agonizing minutes, they reached the position, a small hill, overgrown with bushes, perfect camouflage, and a perfect firing line. Through his periscope, Captain Schreiber counted the Soviet tanks again. The column was endless. T-34-85s, the newer variant with the 85mm cannon. Dangerous, numerous, deadly. They were rolling across the bridge at 15 kilometers per hour, closely spaced, to save time. Perfect for Captain Schreiber's plan, catastrophic for the Soviets. Ethan, the gunner, was already aiming. The crosshairs of his ZF optical sight centered on the explosive charge box on the western pier, 6 and 12 meters distance. Wind minimal from the east. Temperature 18 degrees Celsius. Humid air from the Dvina River. All the variables flowed into Ethan's mental calculation. He wasn't a mathematician like Owen, but he had fired 1,000 shots. His brain was a ballistic computer. "Target acquired, Captain," Ethan reported. "Distance 612 meters, angle minimal. Ready to fire." Captain Schreiber nodded, but not yet. He had to wait. Wait until the maximum number of Soviet tanks were on the bridge. Wait. While every second felt like an eternity. At 6:47 a.m., the critical phase began. The Soviet column was now completely concentrated on and around the bridge. Captain Schreiber counted carefully. 12 tanks already across the bridge, 21 on the bridge, 17 waiting on the western bank. The math was simple. The maximum would be reached with approximately 25 tanks on the bridge. That would be in, he calculated quickly, 47 seconds. Captain Schreiber activated his stopwatch. A personal habit from his university days. 47 seconds. He began to count out loud. 45, 44, 43. His crew listened, hypnotized. Oliver, the loader, had already loaded a Panzergranate 39 into the gun, 10.2 kilograms of steel, with an 810 meter per second muzzle velocity. Designed to penetrate enemy armor. Today, it would decide a war. At 20 seconds, Captain Schreiber felt his heartbeat accelerating, not from fear, from focus. Every fiber of his body was concentrated on this one task. At 10 seconds, he took a deep breath. At 5 seconds, he gave the order. "Fire on my command. 3, 2, 1, fire!" Ethan's finger squeezed the trigger. The 88mm cannon thundered. The Tiger I tank rocked back from the recoil. 56 tons of mass absorbing the kinetic energy. The round flew through the morning air, a flight time of 1.4 seconds. Captain Schreiber held his breath. In those 1.4 seconds, everything was uncertain. Would the round hit? Would the charge detonate? Would the plan work? The round struck the explosive charge box with a precision that even Ethan would later describe as luck. But it wasn't luck. It was training, experience, and German engineering in perfect synergy. The charge box exploded. 3 tons of Donarit detonated in a fraction of a second. The explosion was indescribable. Imagine 3,000 kilograms of explosives strategically placed at the weak points of a 32-year-old stone bridge, detonating simultaneously. The pressure wave alone was strong enough to shatter windows 500 meters away. But the true destruction came from the structural chain reaction. The western piers crumbled instantly. The middle piers, now unsupported and burdened with 650 tons of tank weight, held for exactly 2.3 seconds. Then they broke. The bridge didn't collapse like in movies, where everything falls slowly and dramatically. It broke like glass, instantly, absolutely. 200 meters of stone and steel shattered into 1,000 pieces, and with it, 23 Soviet T-34 tanks, each with a 5-man crew, plunged into the 40-meter-deep Dvina River. The noise was deafening. First, the explosion, then the crash of breaking stone, then the metallic screech of falling tanks, then, worst of all, the silence, a brief, horrifying silence, followed by screams. Men trapped in sinking steel coffins, knew they were going to die. Inside Tiger 237, there was initial shock, absolute, numbing silence, despite the noise outside. No one spoke. They had seen it, but their brains couldn't process it. What they had done exceeded anything they had experienced in this war. They hadn't killed in direct combat. They had set a trap, mathematically precise, and sent 115 men to their death. The morality of it would haunt them forever. Oliver, the young loader, threw up violently in a corner of the cramped tank interior. He had only been with the unit for 2 months, fresh out of training, had never seen anyone die. Now, he had helped to kill over 100 men. His whole body was shaking uncontrollably. Private First Class Oliver would later be diagnosed with what was then called war neurosis. Today, we would call it PTSD. Owen, the radio operator, a former math teacher from Brooklyn, muttered the Lord's Prayer. Not out of piety, he had never been particularly religious, but out of desperation, he had been calculating the numbers in his head. 23 tanks, 5 men per tank, 115 men, 115 families would never know what had happened. Their husbands, sons, brothers were simply gone. In the depths of the Dvina River, forever. Owen felt the weight of those 115 lives like a physical burden on his shoulders. Ethan, the gunner, stared through his sights, unable to believe what he had done. His finger had pulled the trigger, his precision had hit the charge. His skill had killed 115 men. In direct tank combat, it was different. You see an enemy tank, you shoot, it explodes, clean, military. But this felt like murder, collective, precise, calculated murder. Braun would be haunted by this moment for the rest of his life. Müller, the driver, normally the calmest under fire, sat motionless, his hands trembling on the controls. He had followed Captain Schreiber's order, driven the Tiger Gi tank into position, executed the withdrawal. But he had also seen the explosion, reflected in the windows of the tank periscope. He had felt the shockwave, even from almost 2,000 feet away, and he knew, in that moment, his tank had killed more enemies than in all previous engagements combined. Captain Schreiber, the commander, forced himself to be cold. He could not feel, not now. If he broke down now, they would all die. The Soviets would seek retaliation, aggressively, brutally. Tiger 237 had to escape, had to survive, so that this mission had meaning. "Withdraw," he ordered, his voice mechanical. "Immediately. Route southeast. Maximum speed." Müller obeyed automatically, and his hands moving, even though his brain felt shut down. Schreiber forced himself into professionalism. "Withdraw," he commanded. "Immediately." And the Soviets would identify their position within minutes. Müller started the engine. The Tiger I tank retreated, using the same forest cover they had come through. Behind them, chaos. The Soviet column was decimated. 23 T-34s destroyed instantly. 4 more damaged by debris. 115 crewmen dead or dying. But more than the physical destruction was the psychological impact. The surviving Soviet commanders were shocked. How had a single German tank done this? Was it a trap? Were more German units nearby? The Soviet Colonel Dmitry Volkov, commanding the tank column, ordered an immediate halt and defensive positions. His tank division, previously aggressively advancing, now dug in, waiting for reinforcement. The planned encirclement of the German lines was stopped, not by a battle, by a single, perfectly timed shot. The news reached German Army headquarters 3 hours later. Major General Fröhlich read the report 3 times, unable to believe it. A captain had blown up a strategic bridge without orders, destroyed 23 enemy tanks, and stopped a Soviet division. Fröhlich's first reaction was rage, insubordination, Froehlich's second reaction, after studying the situation reports, was respect. Without Schreiber's action, 3 German divisions would have been encircled. The captain had potentially saved 12,000 lives. But protocol had to be followed. Schreiber was ordered to headquarters. He expected a court-martial. What he got was something else. Froehlich received him privately. "Captain Schreiber," he began formally, "you have disobeyed direct orders from the Führer. You blew up a strategic bridge without authorization." Schreiber stood at attention. "Yes, sir, General." Froehlich studied him for a long time. Then, almost smiling, "You also destroyed 23 enemy tanks and stopped a Soviet division. That is more than some divisions accomplish in weeks." What followed was one of the most pragmatic decisions of the war. Froehlich wrote in his report that Schreiber had acted on written orders, an order which unfortunately was lost in Soviet artillery fire. Paper could burn, orders could be lost, but results could not be denied. Schreiber received no medal. That would have been too obvious. But he received something more valuable, the quiet knowledge that he had done the right thing, and the army knew it. The Soviet post-war analysis of the Dvina River operation is fascinating. A 1947 report, declassified until 2003, describes the bridge demolition as unprecedented in its precision. The report, authored by Colonel Engineer Georgy Zhukov, no relation to the Marshal, is remarkable in its objectivity. Zhukov analyzed the bridge structure, the Donarit explosive charges, the tank column, and reconstructed the moment of detonation with mathematical precision. His conclusions were sobering for the Red Army. Zhukov calculated that the timing was optimal within a window of only 7 seconds. Earlier, and only 12 to 15 tanks would have been on the bridge. Later, and over 30 tanks would have already crossed. The German commander had fired at the exact optimum. When 23 tanks were concentrated on the bridge, with maximum structural load, the fact that a single German tank commander achieved this precision, without computers, without modern ballistics calculators, only with a stopwatch, experience and instinct, was cited as proof of superior German tactical training. Zhukov recommended that Soviet tank commanders receive similar initiative training. His suggestion was never implemented. Soviet military doctrine favored centralized control over individual initiative. A fascinating section in Zhukov's report analyzes the psychological factors. He speculated that the German commander must have acted against direct orders, as bridge demolitions at that time required strict authorization. The fact that an officer was willing to risk his life and his career to seize a tactical opportunity showed, according to Zhukov, a fundamental difference between German and Soviet military culture. German officers were trained to think. Soviet officers were trained to obey. Zhukov's report also includes a list of the identified dead. Of 115 crewmen, only 23 bodies were recovered. The others had either been washed downstream or remained trapped in their sunken tanks. Families received standardized death notices, fallen in battle for the motherland. The true circumstances were never mentioned. For Soviet propaganda, it would have been too embarrassing to admit that an entire tank column had been destroyed by a single German shot. One of the identified dead was Lieutenant Alexei Volkov, 24 years old. His sister, Elena Volkova, wrote about the news of his death in her memoirs in 1982. She never learned how he really died. In the official version, he had fallen in a heroic tank battle. Elena died in 1998, still unaware of the truth. Perhaps that was for the better. The thought that her brother had drowned in a sinking T-34, trapped in steel, slowly dying in utter darkness, would have been unbearable. German post-war records concerning the Dvina River operation are scarce. Captain Schreiber's report was likely intentionally minimized to obscure his insubordination. But some details survived in personal diaries and memoirs. Major General Fröhlich wrote in his unpublished memoirs of 1963, "The Divina River Bridge operation was one of the cleverest operations I have ever seen. Schreiber proved that a thinking officer is more valuable than 10 obedient ones. Unfortunately, our army too often taught obedience instead of thinking." But the report also mentioned the human cost. 115 Soviet soldiers died that night, most drowned. Trapped inside their T-34s, unable to escape, as 130 feet of water crashed down upon them. Some survived the initial plunge, only to die slowly, trapped in overturned steel coffins. Rescue attempts were impossible. The Dwina River kept its dead. Werner Schreiber survived the war. Tiger Antank 237 was destroyed in March of 1945 in a skirmish near Kustrin. The Tiger I tank was struck by Soviet Panzerfausts, engulfed in flames, but the crew escaped through the hatch. 2 men wounded, none dead. It was a miracle, a last stroke of luck, in a war that had long since exhausted its supply of fortune. Schreiber returned to Munich in May of 1945, to a city he barely recognized. Allied bombs had destroyed 90% of the inner city. The technical university, where he had studied, was a heap of rubble. His family home no longer existed, just an address in ruins. His family had survived, evacuated to Bavaria, but his city was dead. He resumed his engineering studies in the fall of 1946, when the university provisionally reopened in remaining buildings. The professors were the same, aged, broken, but with the same German drive to rebuild. The students were all veterans, men with old eyes in young faces. No one spoke about the war. They studied bridges, statics, materials, science. Through their work, they tried to forget what they had done. Schreiber graduated in 1948 with honors. His thesis on bridge structure stresses was called the best of the decade by his professor. The professor didn't know that Schreiber had combined his theoretical knowledge with practical, deadly experience. That every calculation about structural failure for Schreiber was linked to memories of falling T-34s and drowning men. He worked on rebuilding German bridges, an irony that wasn't lost on him every day. The man who had destroyed a bridge in the most spectacular way spent his life building them. He became a recognized expert in bridge design, working on over 40 projects in Germany and Austria. His bridges were known for over-engineering, twice as strong as necessary, designed to bear every imaginable load. Colleagues called it caution. Schreiber called it atonement. In 1956, he married Eleanor Bauer, a nurse who had served in a field hospital during the war. They understood each other without words. Both had seen death. Both carried scars. Both tried to live in peace, with memories that made peace impossible. They had 2 children, both daughters. Schreiber was a good father, loving, present, but sometimes the children saw him absent, staring into the distance, trapped in thoughts he never shared. In 1973, during an engineering conference in Latvia, Schreiber visited the Dwina River. The Soviet authorities had built a new bridge 3 miles downstream, modern. Steel and concrete. The old bridge had never been rebuilt. The ruins still lay in the river, visible at low tide, a forgotten memorial. Schreiber stood on the bank, alone, while his colleagues were in the city. He stared at the water. Somewhere down there, 130 feet deep, still lay the wrecks of the T-34 tanks. And maybe, probably, the bones of the men he had killed. He had no religious beliefs, but in that moment, he spoke a silent prayer. Not for forgiveness. He didn't believe he deserved forgiveness, but for peace. For the 115 men who had died here. For himself. A local guide, an old man, came to him. speaking in broken German. "Do you know the story of this bridge?" he asked. Schreiber nodded slowly. "I know." The old man looked at him strangely. "My brother died here in 44, a T-34 tanker. He was on this bridge when it exploded. We never found his body." Schreiber felt his heart stop. He wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. The old man continued, "The German bastards blew up the bridge. 115 men died, but the war is over. We must forgive, not forget." Schreiber could only nod. The old man walked away. Schreiber remained, staring at the water, his shoulders shaking. Tears he had held back for 29 years finally flowed. Werner Schreiber died in 1989 of heart failure at the age of 74. In his final weeks. In the hospital, he sometimes spoke deliriously. His daughters heard words they didn't understand. 23 tanks, 115 men. "Forgive me." The nurses thought it was confusion. His family knew better. The war had never left their father. He had only learned to live with it. After his death, his wife Eleanor found a sealed letter in his desk, addressed to the family of Lieutenant Alex Volkov. Soviet Union. The letter, written in German, had never been sent. Eleanor opened it. It was an apology, 6 pages long, detailing what had happened on July 18, 1944. Why Schreiber had made the decision, his regret for the dead, his understanding that no apology could ever be enough. The letter ended, "I fulfilled my mission. I saved 12,000 comrades, but I killed 115 men. These two truths exist together. History will count one as a success. My conscience counts both." Eleanor wept as she read the letter. Then, after much thought, she burned it. Some pain must die with those who bear it. Modern military analysis of the Dvina River operation is taught at war colleges worldwide. The United States Military Academy at West Point uses it as a case study in initiative and timing. The British Royal Military Academy Sandhurst teaches it in the context of command flexibility. The German Army Academy in Hamburg uses this story to illustrate the tension between obedience and initiative. But the lessons extend beyond military tactics. The Dvina River Bridge teaches us about impossible decisions, about the fact that sometimes every option has a terrible price. Captain Schreiber could wait and let 12,000 comrades die, or act and kill 115 enemies. He chose what was mathematically logical, but mathematics takes no souls into account. The story also teaches us about the burden of the survivors. Schreiber lived for 45 years after the war. 45 years in which he lived with his decision. Every single day. He built bridges, raised children, had a successful life. But part of him always remained in that Tiger eye tank, staring through the periscope, watching the explosion, counting the falling T-34s. War traumas don't end with the armistice, they just get quieter. For the families of the 115 dead Soviet soldiers, the Dvina River operation brought only pain. Their men didn't die in a heroic engagement. They died in a trap, caught helpless, drowning like rats. There's no honor in such a death, only terror. Soviet propaganda hid the truth, inventing more heroic narratives. The families believed the lies because the truth was unbearable. Today, both sides are gone. Schreiber, his crew, the Soviet soldiers, their families, only the story remains. And the lessons. That war forces men to become inhuman. That tactical brilliance doesn't erase moral ambiguity. That decisions in extreme situations are never simple. That those who survive sometimes suffer more than those who die. These stories fade with each generation. The last veterans are gone. The tanks are scrap metal or in museums. The bridges are ruins, but the truth remains. If this historical honesty is important to you, please support me with YouTube's super thanks. Every contribution enables me to visit archives, to digitize old war diaries, to secure the last documents. These men, their decisions, their agony, deserve to be remembered, not as glorification, but as a warning, as a testament to the terrible complexity of war. What moved you most about this story? Was Schreiber's decision right? Is there even a right in such situations? Many viewers have deep moral discussions in the comments. Share your thoughts, because these questions, these impossible dilemmas, are timeless. And understanding the past helps us, hopefully, to build a better future. In post-war interviews, Schreiber rarely spoke about the Dvina River Bridge. When he did, it was without pride, without glorification. He described it as what it was, a military necessity, born from desperation, executed with precision, bought with human lives. The 115 Soviet soldiers who died were his enemies, but also human beings. This ambiguity burdened him his entire life. Caleb Brown, the gunner who fired the fatal shot, found less peace. He struggled after the war with what is now called PTSD, the memory of the explosion, the falling T-34s, the screams haunted him. He sought help, but in the 1950s, no one really understood war traumas. Brown died in 1962 of heart failure at only 52 years old. His widow found a diary in his personal effects. The last entry, dated July 1944, read, "Today, I did something that was tactically brilliant and morally horrific. I don't know if God can forgive me. I know I'll never forgive myself." Modern military analysis of the Dvina River operation is taught at war academies worldwide, not as glorification, but as a case study in precise tactics under extreme pressure. The lessons are clear. Initiative can be more decisive than orders. Timing is more important than firepower. And a single, well-trained soldier can change the course of a battle. But the story also teaches something darker. War demands decisions that are unimaginable in peacetime. Schreiber had to choose between 115 enemy lives and 12,000 of his own comrades. The math was clear, the morality never is. This ambiguity, this impossible burden, is carried by all soldiers who have to make decisions in extreme situations. The Dvina River Bridge was never rebuilt. After the war, Soviet planners decided that a new bridge 3 miles downstream would be more efficient. The ruins of the old bridge remained slowly decaying, a silent memorial to a night in July 1944. Local fishermen avoid the spot. They say that when the river is low, you can sometimes see the shadows of the sunken T-34s. But that's probably just legend. Probably. These stories fade with each generation. The last veterans are gone. The tanks are scrap metal or in museums. But the lessons remain. If this historical truth is important to you, please support me with YouTube's super thanks. Every contribution enables me to visit archives, to digitize old war diaries, to secure the last documents. These men, their decisions, their burden, deserve to be remembered, not as heroes, not as villains, but as humans who had to make impossible decisions in impossible times. What moved you most about this story? Many viewers have shared family stories. Grandfathers who had to make similar decisions, letters that have survived for generations. Share your story below. Every comment is a piece of history that we preserve together, because these moments, these decisions, these men must never be forgotten.